interesting topic.
You know, if you ask me this question, I'm happy to answer it, but maybe the answer takes 1 hour.
I will need the too long don't read version of it. I think we are live, aren't we?
No, just a minute.
I see a button that says live on Facebook. Yeah.
No, so maybe we are. We'll let Mary decide on that.
I'll start waving just in case. I've never watched something live on Facebook.
No. Mary's
So we are officially live, and welcome to ScaleUp Valley podcast. Today we have not just one unicorn, but 2 unicorns. So today's show is about scaling engineering with Pedro, engineering director at Talkdesk, and Stijn, co-founder and CTO at Collibra. Okay, thank you so much, Pedro. Please kick off the show, and thank you. If this sounds interesting, stay here until the end.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Mary, for the introductions, and also very important. This is not the first session of our podcast, so all know ScaleUpValley.com. So if it is your first time here, so it's the place to be if you want to learn with people that are doing it or they have done it in the past, of kind of having the ability to actually to create a startup and to bring to this stage of scaling up. And obviously we have a lot of shows, so we talk about product, marketing, talent. Today's session is about engineering, and to talk a little bit about engineering, and also obviously all the bits and bobs of scaling up. We have Stijn with us from Collibra. So Stijn is based in Belgium, although he lived previously in New York. I'm assuming that because obviously of starting up Collibra, and in startup life, we really need to go where you need to be in order to make sure that you're successful. Stijn, we took a look to your career path. You're a founder, which is, I think it's pretty much the first time we have someone that was kind of one of the creators of the company that we are having in this show. So that's amazing. So tell us, you're the CTO of the company. You were previously the COO, so you're a co-founder. So tell me a little bit more about the responsibilities that you have at Collibra, that I imagine they are quite a lot.
Yeah, and they varied. Thanks, Pedro, and thanks for hosting this event. Yeah, if I look at Collibra, the founding of it, and my responsibilities, you have to understand it's been 11 years now, right? So we've started the company in 2008. June 2008, so now we are June 2019, so that's 11 years, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and honestly, I think in 11 years so many things change, of course, especially in technology. The last couple of years have been crazy in the market and in general, and in our company as well. But I think we have at least another decade of work to do with Collibra, because data is so important, and organizations are just struggling to really manage it as an asset. Most of the time is still spent by business analysts and data scientists and whatever. It's still spent on searching for the data that the company has. Now, my responsibility, so as you mentioned, I shifted a little bit, or my title shifted. Mm-hmm. So in the beginning, when we started the company, we were 4 people, so 4 founders. And to a large degree, we didn't know what we were doing, right? We were very young, studying and doing PhD in the university, and then we started an enterprise software company essentially. So we can imagine how many things we had to learn along the way, and honestly, that still continues. But specifically about my responsibilities, because the other founders had other ones. So for 2008 to 2014, I think, the first period of Collibra, my title was the Chief Operating Officer, and then after that, my title was the Chief Technology Officer. So as a Chief Operating Officer, in the first year, everybody's coding, everybody's
no matter what.
Right? Everybody's doing everything. But then as soon as you start to get a little bit of traction in the market, we get a first customer, a second customer, so you're doubling, right?
Yeah.
Things start changing, and slowly some responsibilities start to shape. So for me, my COO role was very field focused, in the sense that I was responsible for all of the pre-sales, so technical sales, doing proof of concepts, demos, that sort of stuff, with very early software. So you can imagine what that looks like. And then I was also responsible for post-sales, which is, professional services, the implementation at the customer after the customer has become a customer. And again, these two are easy to combine in the beginning because you have no customers when you start. So there's no implementations needed yet. But then, we have one, and so on. And then I also had the responsibility for partnerships. So, connections to other technology companies, but also, Collibra, we're very much in a bigger ecosystem. We have our software and we have some of our own professional services, but we cannot do everything ourselves. Our market is global, our companies are large. So typically they require strong, big project teams, oftentimes across the world. So we work together with the smallest boutique consulting firms who do, for example, strategy consulting and information management or data governance or something like this. And then we have partnerships all the way to the biggest, the big four and the Accentures and so on of the world. So Collibra's partner system is all of those. And again, in those early years, for them to be a partner means you're just meeting them from time to time. You're not really necessarily doing a lot of business together yet. But then what happened for me, that my role shifted. So as you said in the beginning, I was in New York for 4 years, 2014 to 2018. And this is all about going where you need to be, right? And for us, we're a Belgian company. We started in Belgium. So, we tried to do some business in Europe at first. But when you look at the market of the US, it's one big unified market.
Yes, absolutely.
The fragmentation in Europe, it just makes it harder. And we started seeing attraction in the US, and we realized, okay, we'll probably be able to better tackle that market when we actually have a physical presence, because everybody's always asking, right, where is your office and so on.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then personally, I was traveling so much that after 5 years, my wife was saying, this doesn't work. So also personally, it was better for me to move, because then, there would be less travel.
Yeah.
Because if you travel in the US, it's easier, right?
Yes.
So I moved into the US, and it was a very difficult year because there were 0 people there, and then I came, and then, we found 2, one pre-sales, one sales, and then we had 3 people there. Now there's probably 120 people in the US. And it was hard because we had to build everything up there. But at the same time, we had to find people who knew what they were doing.
Yes.
So we found somebody, I found somebody to take over my responsibilities for pre-sales, for professionals, for post-sales, and for alliances. And I had nothing left. So I'm like, okay, this is good. My work here is done.
Good job well done.
But of course, you're always trying to figure out how can I help with the business. So then my role shifted to CTO. And under the CTO role, there's really different frameworks, right? And we can talk about that for a bit. But inside Collibra, the responsibilities became, and again, many of these I had to build up again, right? I had to build up the teams. So the biggest priority was the product responsibility, which is things like product management and the roadmap, user experience, a number of other things. There was research and education, right? Because we're a very new market. So our customers have a lot of learning to do.
I see.
We need to scale that up. We had a marketplace, right? Because of the ecosystem. And then technology partnerships. For example, now we have technology partnerships with large companies like Tableau or AWS and many others, of course, also smaller ones. These are all part of my responsibility since, let's say, end of 2014.
Oh.
And then just to finish that up, because Collibra, as you grow, and you called it a rocket ship, right? And I said, well, it's not a rocket ship because everybody has to pedal really hard. So when you grow, the company changes a lot. And in the last, let's say, 6 months or so, we had some management updates also at Collibra. So we hired a chief product officer, a very seasoned Jim, a very seasoned, very experienced, very smart and knowledgeable person to take over my responsibilities on the product side. And we also hired an SVP of engineering. So again, I'm at 0 responsibilities right now as a CTO. And my next thing that I'm trying to figure out now is, when we say to our customers that data is important, and that you have to have a data office and a chief data officer, etc., because it adds value to the business in this digital world, then we've come to a certain size. We're now 500 people instead of 4. So it's a very big difference.
Yes.
So now we've come to a size, and also data is important to us. So what I'm now trying to figure out is, okay, how can we learn about all the new data technologies that are out there that are adjacent to our space? Because so much is changing all the time. Everybody's going into the cloud right now with AWS, Azure, and Google. And I'm trying to figure out how do we then get value out of data ourselves in our organization. Yeah. So that's like a nutshell of history of my responsibilities over 11 years. Huh?
No, that's amazing. 11 years is quite a lot. And if I may add, one thing that actually kind of stands out, definitely, is that, so you created the company when, I don't know if everyone that's listening to us realizes that, but it was during the crisis in Europe, right? So it was not easy. So I think that companies were struggling, even countries and all of that. And all of a sudden, there you go and say, hey, I'm going to create a startup and let's see how it goes. That's pretty remarkable, right? And even more important, being in Europe, right? When we kind of start understanding that, just like you said, in the US, it's much easier to start than in Europe, right?
Yeah, it's... we did start in the crisis, and there are definitely differences between Europe and the US. The crisis, I think, like I said, we didn't really know anything. We were not very experienced in starting something or building a company. So you would think it's hard to start at the crisis, but actually, when you're starting something, starting in the crisis is easy because it's not as if there is no more money being spent, right? And it really makes you have to focus a lot harder because the money that is being spent is spent on things that are really necessary.
Yeah.
So it's in from my experience, maybe I'm biased, but it was a good time for us to start, especially because 2012, as a consequence of the crisis, the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, created a regulation called BCBS 239 that sort of mandated that the big banks, the globally systematically important banks, had to have a chief data officer, which also happened to be our prime target audience. So in a way, the crisis created 4 years later the business driver that became a very important part of the initial growth of our business. Of course, now we do more, right? We cover both. And with respect to starting in Europe versus in the US, I don't know. I think my perspective on this, Pedro, honestly, has become a perspective of orders of magnitude. So I'm from Belgium. We started in Belgium. Belgium has a population of 10 million people. It's not a big country. Now think about this. Our market, of course, is a global market, but you have to start somewhere, right? So if you have a market of 10 million people, okay, but then you have Europe, which is supposed to be 300, 400 million, right? And then you have the US, which is also 300-400 million people. So imagine that you're building something and you can sell it to all the people in Belgium, or you can sell it to all the people in the US. That's an order of magnitude difference. And that determines, the scale you can achieve. You can never achieve the same scale in Belgium as in the US, because you're starting in a very different context. Of course, you can move to the US. And why is Europe, Europe and the US, they're equally big in some ways, but also different in other ways because of their fragmentation. So I think that's what makes it hard Now, it's also 11 years ago, so starting up in Belgium was very different back then than it is now. If there was an event recently called the Big Squeeze, I went there in Belgium, and I was impressed. I was seeing at least 50 startups or scale-ups to a certain degree there, whereas when we started, it was a lot less.
Yeah.
When we started, the amount of venture capital that was available in the market was this, and now it's this. So the conditions have certainly changed. So would I start a company again in Belgium? Of course. Would I start it again in the US? Of course. They're just different external conditions you have to deal with.
Yeah, I agree. And to be honest, probably Collibra actually had a lot of intervention or a lot of these good things that happen in Belgium, right? Because when obviously the tech scene in the country can actually grow and evolve as soon as you start having good examples. So I'm pretty sure that what you see today and all of these tech scene changing in Belgium, I'm pretty sure that Collibra actually kind of had a cut on that and helped the country actually to kind of to understand that there is more besides these classic or traditional industries, and that actually quite young companies can actually make a difference and be quite global, right?
I hope so. If we can set an example just by doing our business, then that would make me very happy, because there is a lot of great talent. There is a lot of great knowledge. We have great universities. We have great technology. So there's really a lot of opportunity in Belgium and in Europe as a whole, of course.
Yeah, I agree. I need to ask you this. So one thing that usually we see when a company in Europe, being Portugal, Spain, Belgium, another country, one thing that we usually see is there is a lot of temptation to actually to move or to create offices on the West Coast. Okay, so usually San Francisco is a place to be, but actually you decided to go to New York. So I'm pretty sure that you have a lot of reasons to do that, mainly or namely the time zones and all of that. Explain us a little bit what made you go to New York and not to the other coast.
Yeah, that's a good question. And somebody asked me also this recently, and of course you have to take my answer in context, right?
Sure.
What is the best location for you and your business or your engineers or what have you really depends on your company, on your context. So for us, when we are a technology company, so when we were meeting people and we started talking, we're moving to the US, they all said, oh, you have to move into the Bay Area, right? You have to move into Silicon Valley. That's where all the technology companies are. And in a way, it sounds exciting, right? Because Silicon Valley is, it's nerd heaven, right? It's like, oh, everything's happening there, so you want to go there. It sounds exciting. Of course, when you're actually driving through, it's not that exciting, right? It's like, oh, it's just trees and hills and okay, yeah. So there, and then you have the office of Apple and Google. So those are the exciting bits. That there's really big, huge technology firms there that are really making a lot of difference. But then, so it was exciting and it was personally interesting. But for our business, in those years, our primary customers were financial services, banks, insurance, asset managers, things like this. And pharmaceuticals. So if you look at the East Coast of the United States, New York has a big concentration of financial services, some pharmaceuticals as well. But then you go to New Jersey, there's more. Same thing in Boston. So you have like a whole strip, including later federal DC area. So you have a whole strip of concentrated business on the East Coast that is very different on the West Coast. So for us, business was a big driver, but then also, honestly, practically the time zones. Working with Europe from New York is a 6-hour difference.
Yeah.
Maybe you wake up early in the morning at 6 in New York. You can do a call. It's noon in Belgium, so that's fine. But you can continue until noon in New York, and it's 6 p.m. in Belgium. So okay, it's still fine. Maybe somebody stays a bit longer, but you don't want to have people start their day at 5 a.m. every day or stay until 11 p.m. every day. And the challenge in collaboration between, if let's say you have distributed teams, right? The challenge in collaboration between Belgium and California is the 9-hour time difference. So there's only in somebody's normal workday hours, 9 to 5, right? I'm simplifying. There's only 1 hour that really overlaps, which is the 5 p.m. in Brussels and the 8 a.m. or the 9 a.m. in California. So it really makes it hard to collaborate. For us, it was business as well as just the pragmatics of the time zones and the collaboration. Plus, it's just you've traveled there, right? It's easy to travel to New York. It's still a little bit of work, but it's a lot harder to travel to California.
Absolutely. It's really, really hard. I don't know if everyone is aware, because actually to get to New York, it's a no-brainer, regardless of the country in Europe that you are. But yes, to get to the West Coast, it's a huge challenge. A lot of hours of flying. You're probably going to need to go to London and to go directly, or you need to go to Chicago to change to another flight. So definitely going to New York makes everything much simpler. I totally agree.
Yeah,
with you.
it was fun being on the plane all the time because
Yeah, you could. Yeah.
Right.
No, absolutely. And tell me one thing. So one thing that you mentioned now that actually I believe that everyone's very interested is. So I think that it's usually one thing that it's almost like a pattern, right? So you're in Europe, you tend to open an office in the US, and sooner or later you're going to end up with this dilemma of having distributed teams. Usually you can have like engineering teams on both sides, or product teams, or you have sales teams. Regardless of the nature of the teams, the thing is you can't just have everything on one location, because as soon as you are global, you're going to start to have more offices and more people to coordinate. What are the challenges kind of that you remember, or like the scars that you have from dealing with remote teams, and what do you believe that actually worked best for Collibra in terms of collaborations? I think you mentioned a little bit about kind of the time zones and trying to search for overlapping hours. Do you have any more tips and insights on that?
Yeah, of course, and I'll also refer to my colleague Dieter, who's the VP of engineering, and he's had these problems even more. But essentially, it's to work remotely or to work distributedly, that's not something that we do. Although because of our global business, there is a lot of people in different offices having to collaborate. And I think what I've learned this from some of my US colleagues: the norming, storming, and forming. When you're building new teams, you're forming them, right? So first there's the storming, so that it's messy, and then they're forming, and then they're norming. It becomes standard. So it's just another way of saying that when you're working on different locations, even if they're in Belgium and you're all working in your home office, for example, what matters to me is that you're trusting each other. So that's why I think it's important that when you first become a team, you really get to know each other, right? And you really work closely. And almost inevitably there, you need strong face-to-face time, right? You need to get to know each other. You need to get the strengths and the weaknesses of the people, how they communicate, etc. And then it becomes a lot easier to, not be together all the time. Although you do want to be together from time to time.
Yeah.
Because there are always things that happen at the coffee cooler that don't happen with a Slack Giphy, right?
Indeed.
Unless you really know each other. So for us, what we've done with Collibra, Dieter's preference was always to keep the teams as close as possible. So we had the office in Brussels, which is still half of our R&D office. And then in the very early days, we realized, okay, scale-wise, we may have to think about another office, or just finding people fast enough, finding talent fast enough. So we at first started outsourcing, nearshoring, whatever you call it, into Poland, in Wrocław. So this is 7-8 years ago. You know how it goes. You start with one person, and then two, and so on. And then after a few years, we had so many people there that we actually turned it into an office. All the people became part of Collibra, and they actually have the coolest office in Wrocław. Wrocław itself as a city has now also changed. Now there's a lot more people who will try to bring their IT over there. So essentially, our challenge on the R&D side is only spread over 2 locations. But even then, you're already seeing those problems, right? There's no direct connection, for example, between Brussels and Wrocław. So it's a little bit messy to get between the locations. You need to have that, exchange, especially as the company is growing.
Yep.
1 year you're 30 people, the next year you're 60 people, the next year you're 100 people. So nobody knows each other anymore. You don't know everybody's names anymore. You don't have any history with them. They just started. Their new faces. So that really makes it hard, and it takes time to manage that. So that was our choice to how we worked. We may open up a 3rd office at some point in time, or a 3rd engineering, or change to more fragmented engineering. But then you start to notice that, and Dieter was explaining that it's also tied to how the software is architected together, right? So because we built out our product to a certain degree, parts of it are more like a monolith, and then it's very hard to say, okay, spread teams all over the world, because they're all working on the same monolith. So we're going through some re-architecture now, where we're saying, okay, let's take this piece out, let's put it there, let's take this piece out, put it there, so they're more loosely coupled in some way. And then it's easier to say, okay, let's take this location and wherever, and there could be a 3-man team or a 10-man team, and they only work on that piece. So the geography of the teams is now also bound to the software product itself.
No, absolutely. I think that actually, if I'm not mistaken, it's called the Conway's Law. That pretty much, kind of the architecture kind of almost shapes the company, and the other way around, and the company kind of, the way that you structure a team is going to shape the architecture of your system. So actually, for distributed teams, it's something that obviously allows you to actually leverage a lot on this thing of kind of creating small pieces of systems that all of them combined, loosely coupled, just like you said, can actually deliver value to the customers. One thing that you just mentioned, and actually it kind of I can relate a lot to that. You mentioned change. You mentioned change quite a lot on your previous answer. And let's face it, right? Collibra is already a big company, a unicorn, right? Is it fair to say that change is the only constant in the life of a scale-up? What's your take on that?
Well, it's not the only constant. There's many other constants, but it's definitely true. It's always out there. Just think about this, right? And I forget the exact numbers, so some of the numbers that I'm saying are slightly wrong. For example, now we're 500 people. Like you said, we're not a small company anymore, because when you're 500 people, you need the organizational structure, some management hierarchy, some policy, some process. That's very similar to a 2,000-man company, right? There's not a lot of difference there anymore. But essentially, 1 year ago, let's say we were 350 people, right? The year before, we were 150 people. The first year in New York, 2014, I think when we did our team event, because we were growing so fast, we always took the whole company together in a team event. And in 2014, that was in Las Vegas. And I think the people that assembled there, we were 80 or 90 people. So you have to imagine that you're adding all these people in short time, while you're trying to figure out how to organize for all of this and plan for all the growth. So the change is inevitable. It's almost there. I would even argue, Pedro, if you don't plan for this change, and if you're not mentally capable for this change, maybe sometimes even physically capable for this change, because there's a lot of moving parts, you will limit the growth of yourself, your team, and your organization. So for example, for my part, I have to deal with responsibilities changes, but the responsibility changes or the organizational changes and the value you want to add to the company also require you to learn new things, right? So I'm always trying to figure out, okay, let me take this course, let me study that book, because your thinking also has to change, right? So
yes,
you need
absolutely.
a different framework for 500 people versus 40 people. You need, if you want to have a strategy for the product for the next 3 years, that's different from 3 months. So you really need to learn a lot of new approaches and frameworks and concepts that you can then apply. And that's I think we have another 10 years of work, and I think we'll need to do another 10 years of change.
No, absolutely. And to be entirely honest, I usually see myself, or at least here in Portugal, usually people say that, for instance, doctors, they have a very challenging job because they are constantly kind of learning new things because medicine is constantly evolving. But to be entirely honest, just like you said, if we take a look to the software engineering world and even the way that we think about products, the way that we engage the market, I believe that if you don't read at least one book per month, or well, I think one book per month, I think it's more or less like a good average. I think you're just going to get behind, because there is always someone that is going to read, is going to learn something new, and that is going actually to kind of to reframe better the situation, going to have a better approach, and probably is going to get there first than you. So I really believe that you really need to make sure that you're always up to speed with everything that's happening.
Correct. You're completely correct. And it's not easy when you're fresh out of school. You're used to learning a lot, so you're picking up new things a lot quicker.
Yeah.
When you grow in your career, you have a lot of other things to worry about. Maybe you're managing a team. Maybe there's a lot of external factors that now you're just not learn. You don't have the option to learn necessarily as fast anymore. So, but you have to then learn smarter and learn different things, of course.
Yes.
And I think for an engineer right now, it's not easy because the pace of technology is so fast. Think about it. In our space, for example, when we were talking to customers, we're always asking, do you have a data lake, right? Because it's a fundamental piece of infrastructure, for measuring all things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's say 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, when I was asking that question, the answer would always be, oh, we got some Hadoop stuff, right? Like Hortonworks or Cloudera or MapR. It would be one of those three. Now, nothing. Hadoop was new in a way, but now it's all in the cloud.
Yes.
Amazon is delivering 27 new services every month or something. So just think about, and there are more programming languages than ever before.
Yes, absolutely.
Think about the amount you have to learn, and the speed at which you have to learn these new things is almost a little bit scary.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Again, everything is changing and happening so fast. It's not easy for sure. And we're talked about engineers and all these challenges that our engineers face. To make sure that they are up to speed, that they are updated. It's very easy to be caught off guard and just kind of stay outdated very, very quick. And obviously, we are talking about the hard skills. So definitely, soft skills are also very important for us. In your perspective, what do you value the most in an engineer? So let's say that we have a software engineer that is listening to this show. Maybe he's reconsider or thinking about moving to Belgium or to Poland. Maybe he would like to join Collibra. So what do you value the most when we talk about a software engineer?
What do I value the most? Obviously, I think it's a number of things, right? Obviously, he or she has to be technically strong, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that you can write some algorithm the fastest. You can write it down on the whiteboard, or that the intricacies of some programming language or framework the best. That's not necessarily what I mean. You want a strong, like a strong computer scientist who knows all the frameworks, who knows all the best practices, who knows, a programming language or two, isn't afraid to learn a new one also, isn't afraid to learn a new framework, so isn't afraid of that change, but rather is happy to take it, right? Is like, oh, try something new, great. And mostly that can apply it, as a software. You're not looking for a professor, right?
Yes, indeed.
You're looking for somebody who can actually take all that knowledge and skill and translate it into a software product or a service or what have you. So the technical acumen is very important. And then I also think the the openness to learn about the business problem, like what is the problem you're solving, because it's one thing to like play around with technology, that's super fun, but you're doing it for a certain reason, right? So
Yes.
openness to learn about the business problem and really understand it, right? Because you don't need 3 layers of people to say to an engineer, hey, here, do this. No, if the engineer understands the problem, then they know best how to solve it. And then I would say communication. Communication. So there's, you do have lone wolf developers who can do magic things, right?
Yeah.
Maybe contributing to the kernel, or figuring out the next crypto algorithm, or some kind of encryption. It's very specialized things. But in general, when you're talking about regular most engineering, it's teamwork, right? Yeah. There's a lot of other people you're working with. For example, in our company, we have front-end engineers, back-end engineers, we have QA people, we have documentation writers, we have product owners, which is a relatively new role. We have product managers, you have the people from support, and that's only in the R&D group that I'm speaking now. So there's a lot of other roles in the company, and you just have to be able to work with them and communicate with them. So I think that communication, that collaboration is a third. So technical acumen, the willingness to understand and internalize the business problem, and then the communication and collaboration. These are 3 things that I would find most important.
No, brilliant. I'm really happy because definitely we are on the same page. I love the way that we not only value hard skills and soft skills, because they are definitely very important, and they belong to the skill set of a talented engineer, but also the interest of understanding the business, right? Because just like you mentioned, no one does engineering just for the sake of engineering or for the sake of technology. It's actually about understanding the business, the customers, what are the problems that we are solving, right? I went to a conference the other day, and I heard of a sentence that it was just mind-blowing to me. That was, bring problems to engineers and not just decisions. And that's what this is all about, right? We want to make sure that software engineers are helping us to solve problems and to address them on the best possible way to bring value to the customers, not just kind of hey, just code these few lines of code, because that's not just exactly what is expected of them, right?
I fully agree with you there. If you can bring the engineers to the customer, then you have like the shortest communication distance.
Absolutely.
I would say that we've not always been successful at this. We know this, right? We know that this is true, but we've not always been successful in this, because as we were scaling up, we're trying to figure out all the roles, and all the different parts of the organizations are scaling up at the same time. You have a whole marketing team that's scaling up. You have a sales team that's scaling up, like sales engineers are also technically quite strong, right? So most of them you can't bamboozle them, right? Because they actually have to take the software, however bad or good it is, right? Because it's never perfect. They have to take it, and they're in front of the customer with red cheeks, because the button is making the software explode. So and then you have the product organization, which at Collibra is, I always called it like the demand side, right? So the product managers manage the demand side. So they manage like what is the most common demand across customers, what is most priority. And then you have the engineers, and I always call them the supply side. They actually build what needs to be built. And in that growth, we've seen, okay, if you put too many layers in between to the engineer, then they're too far away from the problem, and then you have too many translation steps, like write a specification and then write this other document and then explain it again and have a meeting, and then you get to a point where the engineer almost, and now we have this, right, needs a product owner close by, because there's 100 questions you can ask in one day, right? Like micro decisions almost.
Yeah.
But if you don't know the problem well enough, you need that product owner. Whereas if the engineer, when we were smaller, the engineer would just go to the one customer, and then you're right there. And whenever, for example, when we have a big issue, when there's a customer like, this is a big issue, your stuff is not working. We say, wait, it's working. Why don't we come and take a look and see what's going on? And then when you dig in a little bit, and it's an engineer doing this who built it, they can typically get to the root cause or the solution so fast. Nobody else can do that. So I completely agree. Bring the problem as close to the engineer as is possible. The challenge is to how to do that in a scaling organization.
Yes.
So now we're at the point that we have the product managers, and then we have the product owners, right? The product owners are part of the engineering team, and they're supposed to be like the contact point for the engineer on the daily basis for the 100 micro questions. So they're supposed to be the person who really knows the problem very well, and then can work with the team to internalize the problem in that team.
That's really, couldn't agree more. No, perfect. Stijn, so we are pretty much almost at the end of the show. I have two questions that I really would love to ask you. So one of them is actually something that we didn't mention or we didn't discuss so far. It's like the unicorn stage that you are right now. So that's pretty much amazing. I don't know if everybody actually understands. There are millions of startups over there. Very few get to the scale-up stage, and even fewer get to this unicorn evaluation, which is something that obviously we almost should all of us have kind of a badge to wear with pride. Tell me one thing. So in terms of Collibra, when did you become a unicorn? Looking back, do you saw like one or two things that actually kind of, that actually made a big impact for you to reach to this unicorn stage? And what changed from that moment to today?
So I think so you have a few questions there, right? How do you get there? What changed for us? So first of all, I would say it's not a goal in itself, right? So don't go chasing unicorns. It's why. But there are some benefits to it, so I'll talk about that. But how do you get there? I have a formula. The formula is really simple, right? It's revenue times multiple has to be bigger than $1 billion. And that's the formula that makes you a unicorn. And the multiple is when you get an investment, the VC will work with you to say, okay, I will pay you 5 times your revenue or 10 times your revenue. And now there are crazy multiples, right? The Ubers and everything, you're talking about 60 and above. Whereas typically, they used to say in the Bay Area, you would get a multiple of 15. That would be high. And, somewhere else, maybe you would have the same company, but they would be in Europe, they would maybe get 10 as a multiple. But, the multiple you get is part negotiation, right? Because you're dealing with the VC. So you're negotiating and you say, no, it's 15. And he says, no, it's 13. So it's a negotiation. But it's also determined by the success of your business and the growth that you've gone through in your business and the growth that you can still get to. Right? Maybe you can grow 100% year over year, but if your limit is, if your market is a $5 million market, then it doesn't matter, right? So for us, we have a recurring revenue model, and a recurring revenue model is of course better to make success at the customer because you're more focused at it, but it's also better for your multiple. So how to become a multiple is just focus on the business, right? Focus on the business, focus on a business that is high growth, that has a great total addressable market, and that you can execute on to actually get, right? That's how you become a unicorn. Somebody still has to give you money, right? So in our case, we were very happy to have capital G, Google, come to us and say, this was earlier in the year, at the beginning of the year, it's like, here's money. We want to give you this money. Like, okay, thank you. Because Google, they are really the data company. They know everything. Because the dossier they had on us, the file, I was looking through this file. It was only 10 pages, and they have a 20-page or 30-page document as well that we can look at. But I was looking through it, and I was like, how do they know all this stuff about us? It's amazing how much they knew about us. So we're happy that the investment from Capital G, because that's not Google. Capital G is the ScaleUp arm of Alphabet, and Alphabet is the mother company for Google. But it's the Google engineers who said, "Oh, look at Collibra." So we're very happy with that support from Google. There's also a natural match with their strength in AI and whatever. Right? So we're very happy with it, and it also gave us the unicorn status. So I always find it a little bit silly, honestly. I cannot wear it, but I bought this latex unicorn mask.
Thank you for that.
I would put it on, but my colleague Fleur from marketing said, "Don't do this, Stijn. It is not allowed." So I'm not doing it. So it's a bit silly, but it's a status symbol in a way, right?
Yeah.
But what I liked about it is that before we were a unicorn, we were not known in Belgium. Now we are. So
Wow.
What the unicorn status has given us, and this is not only true for Belgium, of course, but globally, it has given us a much bigger visibility, much broader exposure.
Yeah.
And that is good for business. So what else did it change? Well, it makes your company more visible, so it makes you more attractive, right? If we were talking about hiring of people or engineers, for example, if they can work for a well-known name or a unicorn name, that's a lot more intriguing than working for a company that nobody has ever heard of. So it does help with a number of things, and in that sense, I'm happy. I'm definitely happy about it.
Great. Love that answer. So I feel that we could actually go with this on for more 2 hours or 3. This show has been pretty much amazing. I think definitely one of the best that we had so far. I really like to close the session with the same old question that I believe that actually brings a lot of value to everyone that is listening to us, and that is, if you only had one advice that you could give to any startup that would like to to grow and to somehow aim to get to just one, like the biggest one that you could give, to get to aim, say, hey, well, I would love to get to the stage where Collibra is right now. You could only give one to them. Which advice would that be?
Whew, this is a trick question.
Yeah, no, sorry for that.
One.
Just one.
There are so many things.
I know.
It's going to sound very high level, right? It's going to sound very high level, but you need to know it takes time, right? Getting to a certain stage of business takes time. Nothing happens in 6 months. Everybody's always like, oh, the overnight success that took 10 years, right? So it always takes time. So look at a 3 to 5 year window, right? That's a reasonable time frame. And look at what you think is happening in that 3 to 5 year time frame, what you think you can realize in that time frame, both technically as well as commercially, the whole 9 yards. Mm-hmm. So what can you get done? And what is your vision for the time frame as to what people will need, right? What is the need and the evolution of the need? Ideally, there's a growth in the need.
Yeah.
Right? That is going to happen over the next 3 to 5 years, and then build and sell that, right? So identify a need, have a vision around the need, and build and sell that. Let me give some other context to this. I think it's a quote from Jeff Bezos, and he says, don't build for what's changing, but build for what's going to be the same for the next 10 years. Right, because that this is going to be a constant need, so this is going to be a great opportunity to build and sell that. If we take another example, just to stay in the same light, so in the next 3 to 5 years, what do I expect? I expect that the cloud is going to commoditize data management, right? So why? Because Microsoft and Google and AWS, they're all battling each other for dominance to be like the operating system for the web.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, all the developers build on me, right? So for the next 3 to 5 years, this is what's going to happen. And then if you see this ahead of you, so this is what's happening, and then you can sort of figure out, well, what will Microsoft do, and what will Amazon do, and what gaps are they leaving, and what breadcrumbs can I pick up? And then you can say, okay, these breadcrumbs are out there. Well, I think I can actually pick up these 3 because I have the technical skills, I have the go-to-market skills. Maybe I can find a team that's interested in it, etc., etc. So that's that's the one advice that I would give. See what's happening in the next 3-5 years, what's your vision around it, and then build and sell that.
Mind blowing. Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. Mary, I think that's it. I'm passing the ball back to you.
Wow, such an awesome show. Was so much learning.
Yeah,
Wow.
absolutely. Absolutely.
One of the best, definitely. So if you like this show, press the button like below. You can watch this and more at scaleupvalley.com, and it's also available on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Spotify. So thank you for the unicorn power today. And hope to see you soon. Goodbye.
Thank you, Mary.
Have a
Thank you,
great
Pedro.
day. Thank
Bye-bye.
you,
Thank you so
Stijn.
much.
Thank you, Pedro. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.